100 years ago, the rediscovery of Nebuchadnezzar's world began in Lebanon. The French consul Henri Poignon roamed the area around El Hermel in search of ancient art treasures. The colonial officials were well trained, the 19th century being a period of great discoveries. Excavations were taking place everywhere. The legendary city of Troy had been unearthed, Egyptian hieroglyphs deciphered. And Henri Poignon was to make a discovery one hot October day that would turn out to be an archaeological sensation. A landscape in Lebanon. Once Nebuchadnezzar's troops invaded this area, their prize was valuable timber, the cedars of Lebanon that covered the land like a jungle. Henri Poignon imagined that the vast kingdom of Babylonia once reached to this point on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, and discovered the proof of his theory. On a rock face, the contours of a ruler wrestling a lion. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the inscription reads. In the last rays of daylight, Henri Poignon snapped a sensational photograph. This is the only preserved image of Nebuchadnezzar. No more than a weathered stone relief, a faint outline amidst ancient myths and legends. Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, fertile Mesopotamia, was the gift of its two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. As far back as 2,500 years before the time of Nebuchadnezzar, works of art reflect the high level of cultural achievement. They impart a curious image of the people and their times. The people of Sumeria, who created a completely new culture that was based on a revolutionary innovation, the invention of cuneiform writing 3,000 years BC. The cultural surge that the invention of these characters brought about culminated in the reign of Nebuchadnezzar and the great Babylonian Empire. From the ancient city of Uruk, new knowledge and wisdom spread throughout Mesopotamia, far to the north and to the west, all the way to the Mediterranean, to the land of Palestine. Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom reached out to Egypt and embraced Jerusalem, a true and mighty empire. The Bible refers to the powerful ruler by name, but in the book of Daniel, truth and legend mingle. God became so enraged by the arrogance of Babylon, it is said, that he turned Nebuchadnezzar into a savage beast. The prophet Daniel wrote, "His hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws." Biblical wrath vents itself in these words. Anger in the Old Testament which emanates from a dramatic occurrence. "2,600 years ago, Jerusalem, the holy city of David, home to all Jews, was not the sprawling metropolis we know today. A mere several thousand Judeans inhabited the small area around the Temple Mount, protected by the city walls. Nebuchadnezzar conquered this ring of stone and razed the holy city to the ground. An old stone relief shows what took place at the time. With the help of battle towers, the Babylonians scaled the city walls. The defenders were powerless against superior military hardware. Metal armor, catapults, a well-devised attack strategy, and clever siege tactics were as effective as the enormous penetrating power of the arrows released by thousands of archers. Nebuchadnezzar engaged in military terror. effective and unforgiving. Thousands were slaughtered. The survivors were abducted to Babylonia as prisoners of war. For the Jews, this is the terrible catastrophe, the wrath of God. And Babylon, an exile reviled, became a biblical trauma and a hotbed of vice. To this day, the remains of Babylon can be visited in Iraq. In the early years of the 20th century, what was discovered here of the former metropolis were only foundations and brick rubble. The buildings erected early in the 1980s are all reconstructions. But they inspire the imagination and convey the splendor and scope of this antique city, a metropolis of myth and legend, and of superlatives. The massive brick walls of Babylon were among the 7 wonders of the ancient world, 12 meters tall and as broad as a highway. And yet another of the 7 wonders could be admired in Babylon. The Hanging Gardens of the Princess Semiramis, Nebuchadnezzar's legendary mistress, whose historic trail, however, was lost in this fairy tale city. The true story of Babylon is concealed behind the tales of the Arabian Nights. Not even the Greek historian Herodotus, who traveled through Babylon just 100 years after Nebuchadnezzar's death, was able to distinguish between legend and truth. The entire city of Babylon, he wrote, is a wonder. Herodotus described the legendary dimensions of the Tower of Babel, but could only speculate as to its use. As for the city itself, he described dimensions that sprang from his imagination. Roads 16 meters wide, walls 25 meters thick, and a circumference for the entire city of 96 kilometers. Here lies the reason why this metropolis on the Euphrates became the stuff of legend in antiquity. It was the German archaeologist Robert Caldaway who, early in the last century, began to seek the facts behind the legends. When Caldaway came to the location where ancient Babylon was presumed to be, he found little more than mounds of rubble covered by desert sand. But Caldaway was certain this must be the place where the legendary Babel lies buried. First excavations exposed the remains of enormous city walls. Here was proof of Caldaway's theory. Only the Babylonians' capital could have been fortified like this. Upon the bricks, he could feel with his own hands what Herodotus had noted down with amazement. The Babylonians knew how to use bitumen to insulate their brick buildings against humidity. A brilliant technical achievement. Caldaway became obsessed with the idea of excavating all of legendary Babylon. For 18 years and throughout the First World War, he continued his digging almost uninterrupted. The bricks from the desert sand quickly confirmed that Caldaway was a visionary with a sense of reality. I, Nebuchadnezzar, have done what no king has done before me, is inscribed in cuneiform on clay tablets. Resurrecting Babylon is what Caldaway would later call his life's work. To this day, Robert Caldaway's successors are equipped with spade and shovel. The excavations that began in Iraq 100 years ago were only the start of an archaeological journey back in time to the Babylonian Empire. Here in Sippar, some 50 kilometers from Koldewey's excavation site, we discover a new archaeological sensation, a library dating back to the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Here, scientists are not hoping to discover works of art or precious metals, but instead a treasure far greater. And it's being uncovered right here. Cuneiform tablets, scripts dating back thousands of years, passing on to us the knowledge of the times of Nebuchadnezzar. Archaeologists have salvaged more than 300 tablets, valuable texts describing rituals and customs, myths and politics. The Library of Sippar, literally a treasure trove of knowledge. Knowledge that must first be deciphered. Translating the scripts is a race against time. Like here in the Museum of Baghdad, cuneiform experts like Professor Sommerfeld must act before these ancient texts disintegrate. Although these slabs are certainly more durable than paper, fluctuations in temperature and humidity will soon affect the clay and crumble the knowledge of Babylon to dust. Knowledge that will yield a detailed image of life in the Babylonian Empire, and also tell of a terrifying event 2.5 millennia ago, an eclipse of the moon. According to surviving clay tablets, when the moon disappeared, priests had to light fires throughout the city. People gathered in the streets and covered their faces with their garments. Prayers and chants filled the entire city. The king's soldiers dipped their hands into dark clay and covered their faces with it. This was the only way to placate the moon, which for the Babylonians was a god called Sin. It was the only way to make Sin reappear. A simple desk in an Iraqi museum, but for the scientist, a place of adventure and discovery. Time-worn symbols in clay. These are the true treasure of archaeological research. They hand down Babylon's knowledge.
The Sumerian, Babylonian and Assyrian people were passionate writers. They noted anything that was worth writing down, letters, documents of everyday life, but also all the knowledge of their time. Literature, myths, astrology, everything we know, we have learned from the clay slabs. Until now, we have found about 1 million here in the Middle East, and we estimate that in the soil of Iraq there could be a further 100 million. And of the scripts we have found so far, only a fraction, maybe 25%, have been deciphered.
Millions of clay tablets, millions of texts. A stroke of good fortune for science. Small wonder scientists try to preserve Nebuchadnezzar's legacy with state-of-the-art high-tech methods. Ancient knowledge of the Orient can be stored forever on glass plates. This technique, where a laser beam scans the surface of the cuneiform tablets, is called holography. The photographic plate is exposed via a series of prisms and mirrors, then developed and preserved with a special fixer. The amazing holographic technique was developed here at the Institute of Physics in Münster. The photographic plate shows a hologram, revealing a clay tablet in all its 3 dimensions. Now scientists can view the cuneiform text in its entirety, an important prerequisite for the translators. Holographic resolution is so high that individual cuneiform characters can be examined under the microscope without endangering the original. And another scientific dream has come true. Holographic images can travel the internet to enable deciphering teams to cooperate worldwide. Cuneiform tablets revealing ancient tales. Babylonian wisdom on today's computer displays. Like the age-old ritual sacrifice, showing just how much daily life in Babylon was permeated by religion. This text proves Babel's impiety and arrogance, at which the Old Testament lashes out, were merely hostile propaganda. The sacrificial rite is prescribed in every detail. The ebullient oil of the priest, the exact placement of hands for the examination, first of the hoofs, and then of the teeth of his sacrificial offering. The high priest must put a necklace of red woolen yarn adorned with colorful stones around his neck at moonrise. Only then will the carcass of the animal be opened and its liver removed. Its shape will indicate the state of the empire and destiny of the king. The entire future is dependent on this organ, this divine symbol. Martha Hausberger, a Munich physician and one of the few cuneiform specialists, documents the vast amount of knowledge the Babylonians drew from their religion. Time and again, she is amazed at the enormous medical knowledge revealed in many texts. But there is also much practical advice for emergencies, such as circulatory collapse. When someone faints, place his head lower than his feet. Slap his cheeks and repeat to him, "All will be well." In many texts, the psychological care for patients has top priority. It often became manifest during conjuration when a priest worked on a patient. Babylonian doctors were able to call on expert medical know-how and effective natural remedies. For certain stomach complaints, herbal enema were recommended. Even the surgical incision of the abdomen is described in detail. What might doctors of today learn from their ancient Babylonian colleagues?
Also ich glaube, dass man damals halt
I believe in those days people took better care of the sick, simply because there weren't the therapies that were needed. None of that was available. They had to listen to their patients and give them the feeling that here is someone who can help them.
Hier ist jemand, der hilft dir. Und in dem Moment, wo ein Kranker das Gefühl
And the moment a patient feels he's being helped, all those physical activities that will heal the body are mobilized. And I think these things tend to be overlooked today. But they are necessary, because the psyche is involved in the process as well.
The knowledge of a great civilization. Just 100 years back, it lay untouched beneath a shroud of wind-borne sand, as Robert Calderway described it. Even today, scientists presume that thousands of texts lie buried in the Babylonian soil, treasures yet to be unearthed. Nebuchadnezzar's metropolis remains as much a mystery as it was for Robert Calderway. Spontaneously, this field of ruins recalls the biblical prophet's curse. It is written, "It shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation." Has the biblical curse really come true? Babylon, the eternal mystery? Could it be that Robert Calderway was able to anticipate that 100 years henceforth, new methods would be developed that would unravel the mystery of Babylon? Rockets, for example. This Russian Soyuz is carrying a reconnaissance satellite into space. During the Cold War, its purpose was to spy on hostile territory. Espionage photos from space. Within this red-hot object falling back to Earth are 150 satellite photos. Among them, one of the 32nd parallel and the 44th meridian, Iraqi territory. Moscow, number 47, Leningradsky Prospect. Once the center of Soviet military reconnaissance. Today, everyone can hire this 007 technology. Spy satellite photos from outer space, an invaluable asset to aerial photo archaeology. From this extreme bird's-eye view, experts can often gain valuable insights. The outlines of former buildings lying dormant in the ground become recognizable on these aerial photos by shifts of color or vegetation. This also applies in every detail to the small spot which the satellite camera shot for us from an altitude of 270 kilometers. Ancient Babylon, visible for the first time ever on a satellite picture. The computer can enlarge the image step by step. This covers the entire area of the former city. In the top left-hand corner, the modern-day palace of Saddam Hussein. To the right of it, the area that Robert Calderway surveyed. The picture reveals that just a very small part of the ancient city has been recorded. And yet, seen from ground level, an impressive reconstruction. Massive walls, wide city squares and quiet alleyways convey an impression of what urban life was like in this metropolis. A maze of alleys. Dozens of wide squares, and yet merely a tiny part of former Babylon. In fact, Nebuchadnezzar's city covered the entire area seen in this aerial photograph, more than 60 times the size of today's reconstruction. Something else can be clearly discerned from this bird's-eye view. A building that was to become legendary. The fabled Tower of Babel. Today, little more than a shallow pond. From above, the picture indicates that the building was apparently designed as a square. It also proves that representations by medieval painters are pure fantasy. The Tower of Babel was not round, but a square-based, stepped pyramid, and probably around 100 meters in height. The mighty building that once stood here has fired the imagination of people down the ages. The Tower of Babel became, much more than the city itself, a symbol of the unbridled hubris and pride that comes before the fall. Herodotus, the father of all historians, must have seen the tower when part of it was still erect, even though the metropolis had already begun to crumble during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar's son. In his imagination, at least, Herodotus would have visualized the splendor of a royal procession on its ascent towards the blue high temple of Marduk, the city god. The path up to Marduk, the city god, a pathway to heaven, the way to the stars. And on top, at the summit of the massive step temple where, according to Herodotus, lived Marduk. Upon a golden bedstead, Herodotus tells us, lay Marduk's bride, a Babylonian virgin, and from time to time the god himself would appear. Marduk, the divine ruler. Babylon's great god, a god who sees all and knows all. In Herodotus' fantastic narrative, dreams mingle with reality. But he could only report what people of the day talked of in the decaying streets of Babylon. For us, in our day and age, nothing remains but brick rubble to lead us to discover the secrets of the ziggurats, the Babylonian temple pyramids. In Borsippa, within sight of Babylon, the mighty ruin of another tower reaches for the sky. Today, scientists assume that these towers were not merely parts of temple compounds, as Herodotus reported, but also observatories for Babylonian astronomers to study the course of the stars. What Nebuchadnezzar and his astronomers sought in the stars were not scientific facts. They viewed the stars as gods and believed that the vast cosmos reflected reality on Earth. Observing the stars, the sun, the moon, and the 5 known planets was to preview the future of life on Earth. The German Museum in Munich. Here in the planetarium, we can get an impression of what the Babylonians knew of the stars. The projection rotor can be programmed to recreate the image of what the night sky over Babylon looked like 2,500 years ago. Our time travel begins, and in the artificial firmament of the planetarium, thousands of stars light up just as Nebuchadnezzar would have seen them. Each night for centuries, the Babylonians scanned this night sky searching for signs. They looked for peculiarities and correlations. Certain stars grew into families, such as Gemini, the twins, gatekeepers of the heavens. Aquarius, the water carrier, determined the course of all earthly wellsprings from up on high. Sagittarius, a hybrid being, half man, half horse, was a powerful ally in times of famine and war. The dreaded bull Taurus had the power to crumble great cities to dust. The Babylonians created the zodiac as we know it today. They divided the firmament into 12 signs and traced the paths of stars and planets. They may even have mastered the technique of optical magnification, the construction of telescopes, like this item, a polished quartz lens, suggests. Certainly the Babylonians developed great mathematical skills. Clay slabs bearing geometric diagrams and inscriptions prove that Nebuchadnezzar's scholars were already familiar with the Pythagorean theorem. Babylonian astronomers greatly increased knowledge in the ancient world, Caldaway wrote enthusiastically, adding, "It is easy to understand that the roof of the high temple was ideally suited for their observations." To date, there is little proof of all this. Much of it is speculation. The myth of Babylon feeds on many mysteries, like the strange basalt lion, which has stood in the Babylonian desert for thousands of years. Caldaway reported that the natives regarded the statue as an evil spirit, a jinn. Just who created this stone statue and why continues to remain a secret. There is another famous and unparalleled building, the Blue Gate to the city, consecrated to the goddess Ishtar. Caldaway was enraptured by the special beauty of the bricks, as is evident in his telegrams to Berlin. And in distant Germany, enthusiasm for the exotic Orient quickly flourished. The blue lumps of brick were shipped to Berlin, then washed and sorted. Then began the reconstruction of the Ishtar Temple on the Museum Island in Berlin. Babylon in Berlin. Nebuchadnezzar's huge city gate, after 2,500 years, it undertook a journey of 5,000 kilometers. And with it came the images of animals which became so typical of the special style of Babylonian art. Animals which the Babylonians worshipped as companions of their gods, and whose portraits on the walls of the processional way once guided every visitor to the city center. What an overwhelming impression the fresh blue of these bricks must have made on those who entered the city of wonders coming out of the desert heat. Blue brick glazing. How was it possible to develop this extraordinary technique 2,500 years ago? Stefan Fitz, a chemist, has used spectral analysis to analyze brick rubble from Babylon and learned its secrets. Together with Andreas Fritsche, a ceramics expert, he's able to demonstrate the complex technical procedure. Of paramount importance is close adherence to the formula. The first step is to fuse potash with silicate sand to produce a sinter, the basic glazing material. Today this is done in a computer-controlled furnace. But how the Babylonians were able to maintain and control the required constant 950 degrees Celsius remains their secret. This is the sinter, a basic form of glass that must be ground to a fine powder. A tiny amount of cobalt and cupric oxide are added. A combination of these chemicals brings about the bright blue color. But how were the Babylonians able to weigh these metal oxides so precisely? The secret remains unsolved. Today we have at our disposal precision scales capable of weighing milligrams. Adding distilled water turns the mixture of powders into a creamy paste, the finished glaze.
Was die Babylonier gemacht haben bei ihren Bauten und bei der Dekoration ihrer Bauten,
What the Babylonians did to their buildings in the way of surface enhancement was a technical masterpiece, and this includes their glazing technique. Bear in mind that many of their basic chemicals weren't available at the time, at least not in their own country, so they had to import them from distant lands of the world they knew. By today's standards, that was quite a feat.
Heutigen Nomenklatur gesehen. Und das kann man nicht hoch genug einschätzen.
Now the glaze is applied. This is followed by another kiln firing process for a period of 12 hours at a constant temperature of more than 1,000 degrees Celsius. The Babylonians were masters at this glazing technique for their brick surfaces. The Ishtar Gate is covered with more than 20,000 such bricks, cloaked in a gown of vivid blue, a reflection of heaven. The road through the Ishtar Gate was the processional way, where the great New Year's festival was celebrated as inscribed in the bricks. For the gods Marduk and Nabu, I paved the inner strip of road with asphalt and fired bricks, atop which I spread a thick layer of glittering dust. May the gods stroll happily upon these roads. This is what Nebuchadnezzar had branded into his bricks 1,000-fold. The Tower of Babel, the Ishtar Gate, and the processional way, all are works dedicated to deities, acts of worship turned to stone. Each laying of a foundation stone was a mystic ritual. All the means that sustained life, victuals such as oil, milk, beer, dates, took on a cultic meaning when the king and the priests prepared the ground for a building in the face of the gods. The old clay tablets describe this mystic ritual in great detail. Cream, honey, and beer, generous gifts from the deities, were poured over the first foundation stone. Sun-baked clay statuettes, messengers of the gods, each holding a metal rod, the divine symbol of power, were placed upon this sacred base. The mouth of a sacrificial lamb was washed with fragrant juniper. May the deities accept this gift with benevolence. Clean white flour, sacred crop of the soil, is sprinkled over the messenger of the gods. Growth and prosperity are passed symbolically to the future building. Then the mystic figurines are buried in the ground, the same hallowed ground that will later support the new building. The buildings have long turned to ruin, but the mystic foundation figurines have survived in the earth to the present day. Herodotus also wrote accounts of rituals, but he, a Greek tourist, would not have made much sense of them. At the time, the mystic Babylonian civilization had been in decline for some time. What remains is his awe of the architectural achievements, such as the city wall. Herodotus was overwhelmed by its fascination. Today, scientists believe that the dimensions he recorded were greatly exaggerated. Today, archaeological research is going in new directions. Here, the seventh wonder of the world is being reconstructed. The Babylonian city wall in the scale of 1 to 100. Cutting lasers make it possible to cut out battlements 1,000-fold. And they also process the fine surface profile of the brick wall. Never before has such modern technology resurrected ancient Babylon. The pioneering work of our experts and scientists is more than a frivolous pastime. This is experimental archaeology. In this model, the errors of Herodotus' measurements quickly become evident. Transferred to the computer model, the number of battlements does not correspond to the given length of a wall. The city wall was not a utopian 96 kilometers long, as reported by Herodotus, but more likely around 19. And, except for the larger representative structures, the brick buildings of the metropolis had only 1 or 2 stories. Our model experiment shows that according to the basic plan, streets ran through a sea of dwellings in perfectly straight lines, much like in the cities of modern America. A modern drawing board city with one important difference. Babylon was built as a vast fortress. A double wall 12 meters high shielded the city area completely. Professor Frommer and model maker Bernd Kammermeier are convinced this city was impregnable with the military technology of the day. The Babylonians were able to develop a great sense of security in their flat-topped houses. And a strong sense of self-confidence. This special camera can give us an idea of the overwhelming impression that would have shaped the lives of these city dwellers in antiquity. "2,500 years ago, nothing on earth compared with this image." Rome at the time was a clay hamlet. Constantinople didn't even exist. And another 2,000 years would pass before the first house was built on Manhattan. "I have done what no king has done before me," are Nebuchadnezzar's immortal words of glory. Herodotus visited a city already in decay, fascinated as he walked along the vast processional way. But how the people here lived, how they practiced their ceremonial rituals, all this remains the subject of speculation, even for Herodotus the historian.
Man muss sich ein Fest so vorstellen, dass im Mittelpunkt die
You can imagine such a festival with the impressive statues of the deities right at the center of attention. Big, ceremoniously decorated and colorful. The king and the important priests all participated. There was song and fires burning everywhere. This sort of religion is still practiced in India today. Generally, we no longer have access to ancient Mid-Eastern religions. But if we want a sense of the atmosphere in which Babylonians celebrated their religious festivals, we can find many parallels in India, which might just open a little window onto what it would have been like.
Sehr viele Parallelen, die uns zumindest einen atmosphärischen Zugang ermöglichen.
It may have looked like this, the big processional way of Babylon on New Year's Day. The religious festival which the people of Puri in eastern India celebrate each year has many parallels to Nebuchadnezzar's big New Year's festival, an ancient religious tradition which may have traveled from Babylon to India, or vice versa. Nobody knows. The similarity with old cuneiform descriptions is striking, as during the Babylonian festival of the New Year, the archaic statues of the deities in ceremonial garb are taken from the temple in Puri and loaded onto the sacred float. The king of Puri, like a reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar, makes a magnificent ceremonial entrance. The king must closely follow the mystic rules at this festival. divine rules. Just like Nebuchadnezzar, he too must ritually sweep the float. With this ritual, he lends his kingdom legitimacy and reinforces the bond between God, king, and the people. The entire population is involved in this ecstatic ritual. Together they draw the sacred float through the town. Religion here is not abstract, but a physical experience. A combination of exertion, ecstasy, and jubilation. The main street in Puri, reminiscent of Babylon. Reflection of the lost world, of which only a lifeless model remains for us today. Even Robert Calderway, who salvaged Babylon from oblivion, was left holding only sun-baked clay rubble for 18 years. The ancient Orient, as a living world, remained for him an elusive fantasy. A fantasy which sometimes turned small fragments of brick rubble into great palaces. In an ebullient cable to Berlin, he declared, "I have discovered the hanging gardens of Semiramis." But Calderway found no more than these immense wall ruins around the area of Nebuchadnezzar's southern fortress. But in his enthusiasm, he assumed that these massive barrel vaultings must have supported an equally massive superstructure, possibly a hanging garden, as depicted on a 3,000-year-old Assyrian stone relief. Did Princess Semiramis' legendary terraced garden really exist? Or was this just a figment of posterity's imagination that Calderway finally succumbed to as well? Today we can test the theory in a working model. To their amazement, scientists have been able to reconstruct Semiramis' garden.
Die perfekten Maßangaben und auch die durchdachte
The precise measurement details and also the well-planned construction show that the building must have existed. We have the amazing foundation measurements, but it must have been an enormous architectural problem at the time to get all this leak-proof. And they tried everything, lead plates and asphalt coating and layers of clay and additional vaulting underneath. We really have no idea how leak-proof all this really was, but it was an immense effort, and it was never tried again. At the back, there was a water duct, possibly a screw conveyor, up to the top level. The irrigating water was then allowed to seep down through the terraces, which meant that the entire building was constantly subject to water. You can see that they were aware of this problem because of the gigantic walls, their width compared with the narrow vaults. In those times, people still believed that the tree roots could reach all the way down to the bottom, which of course is unrealistic, roots 25 meters long, but that's what they believed. And these were surely filled with soil that the water could seep through. Just keeping this building stable was a miracle in itself.
Semiramis' terraced gardens. From a technical aspect, not legend, but in all likelihood, reality. Water wheels like those that might have irrigated a garden like this with water from the Euphrates can still be seen at work in Iraq to this day. A park such as this must have been a major attraction in a city like Babylon. A showpiece probably more fascinating in the quivering heat of the Orient than the tower 100 meters high. But Princess Semiramis, alleged mistress of Nebuchadnezzar, is historically elusive. She is mere legend, a beautiful myth, an added love story symbolizing the age-old dream of a paradise on Earth. Princess Semiramis and her hanging gardens, together they constitute a romantic symbol for this marvelous metropolis of the ancient Orient. For the age-old dream of Babylon, the great city, gateway to the gods. A dream that was followed by a rude awakening. Perhaps the city's real tragedy was that its mighty walls were never put to the test of an enemy. The collapse of power came from within. Nebuchadnezzar's successor, Nabonidus, was banished by his own priesthood. Suddenly, Babylon became no more than a footnote of history, ongoing history that was being made elsewhere. In the end, the Bible, with its terrible prophecy, was right. The cities be wasted without inhabitant, and the houses without man, and the land be utterly desolate.